Hi, everyone. I, I'm Rob with PFLAG San Francisco. We're going to get this started. Trans students today are living through a rapidly shifting policy landscape, and schools are often caught at the center of those conflicts. Tonight's conversation is about what that looks like in real classrooms and communities, what students, families, and educators are experiencing, what these policies actually mean in practice, and how people are responding with courage and resistance. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. S.J. Miller, a scholar activist in gender identity justice and one of the leading voices in trans affirming education. SJ serves as a faculty trainer at Santa Fe Community College and as part-time faculty at the University of Washington School of Educational Studies. SJ is also a frequent contributor to CBS, BBC, and PBS, and is the author of the forthcoming book, We Refuse to Disappear: Resistance Amid Anti-Trans Education Policy. Please join me in welcoming S.J. Miller.
Hey, everybody. Good evening. Nice to see you. I went to Cal, and so it's really nice to kind of be back vicariously in the Bay Area for the moment. So thank you for having me. Let's go ahead and I'm going to talk about setting the stage. I'm going to do a couple of things. First of all, we're going to zoom out and look at the larger context right now about what's impacting trans educators and trans students. And then we're going to come more into the micro, and I'm going to talk about what a pedagogy of refusal is and what that means and how that is a term that I'm using about acts of refusal, the ways in which teachers are pushing back. And then we'll come to a resolve, which is, so what can we do? What can we do in our current roles? How do we push back? How do we fight? And also, what does it look like in states where the anti-trans policies are much more egregious? Because I know you're coming from a state, right, that you have a fairly liberal government, just like I do in New Mexico. So I think it's more important for us to continue to think about what do we do in those places where people don't have the options, they don't have the access points. All right, so I'm going to talk through some slides, and then what I understand, Rob and I are going to stop at a certain point, and we're going to have a conversation with everybody. Okay, all right. So here we go. All right, whoops, let me do this. Let me make sure everyone can see the screen okay. Okay, can everyone see? We're good? Okay, all right. So I'm going to go over some statistics right now to give you kind of a sense of the lay of the land. So currently, and again, this is what's documented. It doesn't mean that these stats are hard and fast. But there are approximately 724,000 trans youth between 13 and 17 living in the United States. Let me get this up on the screen. There we go. Hold on, I'm just trying to get this minimized so I can see everybody. Okay, there we go. Of the current population, we know that comes to about 3.3% of all youth between 13 to 17 are trans. We have approximately about 2.1 million adults 18 and up, and that comes to about 0.8% of the population. And this is approximately 2.8 million, which is of people 13 and older, which is about 1%, right shy of 1% of the United States population. Now, if we look at the national landscape here, we have about 382,000 trans youth that live in 29 states with restrictive laws. Of that number, about 262,000 students, or 262,700 live in states with 4 types of restrictions. Okay, so we see a very large percentage of the students that we know who are living in very, very restrictive states. And of those 4 restrictive policies, we see their bans on gender-affirming medical care, school sports bans, bathroom and facility access restrictions, and curricular censorship. So again, that's a very, very large number of trans youth living in very restrictive states. Now, it's probably no surprise that a majority of the anti-trans legislation is coming out of the South. We're seeing that at about 95%. We're seeing up in the Midwest, we see about 79.8 thousand people living there, where a lot of the policies are coming out. We see on the West and the far east, the east of the United States, we see a much fewer percentage. All right. Now, we're going to look at those 4 areas that I mentioned because those are the areas that are impacting students the most in our country. Currently, there are about 29 states, the number could go up, where there are bans on participation for transgender youth. And if you look at this map, it's probably not surprising. All right, so 29. The bans on school bathroom and facility access is in about 21 states, and that's approximately 298,600 students that are impacted by this. And again, if you look at the very bottom, you'll see that the gray, that is a no bathroom ban. Let me get my pointer up to make it a little bit more. There we go. So the gray here, that includes California, and over here, New Mexico, we're in a similar position as you all. And if you look through here, you'll see the stripe green, the green, and the dark green. And these are all states with some type of restrictive policy. Now, if we look at curriculum censorship, and I'm sure some of you probably are already familiar with this, these are 4 maps. And you're going to see in the top left here, this is where teachers are not allowed to say LGBTQ. Okay. And I'm not going to blow up this map because it's really small, but you get a sense by just looking at it that the states with the dark brown and then the stripes are states with restrictive laws. And then we have the lighter color, which is those states don't have those restrictive laws. Down here in the far left, this is where parental notification is required. So if you're going to talk about LGBTQIA plus issues, parents need to be notified, and those with the most restrictive laws are the dark brown and somewhat in the orange. Now, if you move to the far upper right, you'll see curricular laws, and these curricular laws talk about inclusive LGBTQIA plus curriculum per se, and you'll see again in the dark green the states which have they have no bans versus the states in the orange which have bans, and then the states in the lighter colors which have no bans. And in the very bottom, we have inclusive curricular standards, and this is something to really pay attention to because the dark green, these are standards that supply state legislation and school districts across those states, where it actually talks specifically about LGBTQIA plus people. Whereas in other states, often it's coded, and words like diversity and social and cultural and political views, those are places where teachers tend to insert it. But again, the dark greens kind of give us a sense of what states are supportive within the state standards. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about what happened on January 20th, 2025, when Trump came into office. Basically, there was an executive order, and I'm looking at the far right over here. And we see that Trump put into action, this came right out of the Heritage Foundation, that defending women from gender ideology extremism was paramount. And the core change was that it recognizes only 2 immutable sexes, which rejects gender identity altogether across federal law, funding, and facilities. And the immediate effect was that the removal of trans legal recognition in work, school, housing, healthcare, and federal programs impacted trans students across the United States. Underneath, many of you are familiar with ending DEI in the federal workplace. We know that a lot of this has been rolled back in higher education, though. But what he did was it terminated the DEI programs, grants, contracts, and equity initiatives across the government, and it dismantled federal inclusion infrastructure, creating a nationwide chilling effect. So on the far left, I'm not going to go through these, but essentially what he did is he reversed executive orders that came from 2021 all the way through 2023. With a swipe of a pen. And then down below here, within the executive orders against trans people, I'm just going to scroll down. There was a redefinition of sex. There was an interrogation of the Boystock defiance. That was the first case of trans rights at the Supreme Court level that actually won, which is great. But then he came in and said, no, I'm going to undo that. And he reopened the door for discrimination against trans people. We also saw pronouns in bathrooms impacted, identity documents, housing, prisons, and care, and funding and data bans. Again, this was all within the trans executive order. Okay. All right. For this book, what I did is I looked at the language that was coming out of all of the anti-trans policies in the United States. And essentially, I narrowed it down to these stems. So what we saw coming up over and over were state sports ban policies, bathroom and facility bans, healthcare bans for trans youth, don't say gay trans and curriculum bans, forced outing, book bans, higher ed, federal executive order banning trans participation in sports, the rollback of Title IX protections, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then what's absolutely frightening is the criminalization of educators. Okay. Now, you don't need to look at this, but I'm going to kind of bring us into a discussion around where I was going with the book. Of those 10 policies, what I decided to do, and I overwrote the book because I took on too many of the laws. I was working closely with my editor, and what we did is we narrowed it down to 7 states. And I looked at Montana, Alabama, Utah, Georgia, Mississippi, Florida, had to do Florida, had to do Texas, and then I looked at the federal legislation that was impacting all higher ed areas. And I picked particular laws that seemed to go, not these laws crossed all different states, but I matched it up based on what I'd learned through the methodology. And again, I'm not going to go through that, but those are the states that I focused on in the book. Okay. This is a really hard slide to show, but a really important slide. And I'm just going to let me get out of this so I can talk through it with everybody. All right. Let's put this up. All right. I know this is really small. But I want to have a little bit of I'm going to talk about a story within this. Is that a little bit bigger? Can you all see this okay? I can't see if anyone is nodding. You all could see that slide, even though it's small? We can see it. Okay, great. All right. Okay. So there's a larger narrative behind this, and I think it's a really important narrative for us to look at. This goes to the Title IX discussion that I mentioned earlier. Right before I got on, and I did this, actually, I gave a talk last night on a podcast, and there are about 681 current proposed or laws that have actually passed already in 2026. And let me go to that, double check that number. Let's see. Because every time I do this talk, the numbers change. Like, this is real time. So actually it went up. It couldn't have gone up that much. Yeah, it did go up. Okay. So right now, as of today, and I check this almost daily, what you'll see, this is what's called an anti-trans bill tracker. And this is from translegislation.com. I'm going to give you some resources at the end, but this is a great resource if you want to go on and look at things every day. As of 2026, everybody, there have been 778 bills that have been put forward in Congress. This is in 43 states. 50 have passed. 658 are active right now. and 70 have failed. And what you can do is you can scroll down and you'll see what states and on what issues. Now, if I go back up here, I want to pay attention to 70 have failed, because those that have failed, that speaks very highly to um, whoever is pushing back on those bills, whether it's people writing to their legislatures, it's the Congress saying no, this cannot go through, or those are maybe they went to the Senate and the House and then back to the Senate, and maybe they failed somewhere along the line. But that is an important number to look at. So if we go back to that slide that I was just showing you, let me get out of this. Give me a second. Okay, do you see the slide back up on the screen right now?
No, we're still on the anti-trans bill tracker.
Okay, give me a second. Okay, now.
No, we're still on the anti-trans bill tracker.
Give me a second. There's always tech stuff, right?
You see, got back on the slide.
Now it's on the slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
Although,
But what? You can see the slide?
It's the slide that says anti-trans bill by policy area, outcomes, and states.
It's exactly where we should be. Okay. So what I want to do is kind of set a perspective for you around where we are with these bills. So I was trying to do an analysis as far back as I could about looking at anti-trans laws over time from Obama forward. Now, I wanted to go back pre-Obama, but Obama is really, that's the pivotal moment, because Obama was the person who came in and made an executive order that gender identity was going to be added to Title IX. He was the first president to ever do so. And this is important because what we saw under Obama was really where things started to change with the government and where a lot of this animosity came from. So under Obama, if you look down here, let me get my little pointer back. Okay. Oops. Where did it go? Where's the pointer? Where is the pointer? Okay, I guess this is working here. Under Obama back in 2015, and I did 15 and 16 because really that's where we started to see the numbers climb. 21 bills, that was during, but 0 passed and 21 failed. Now, here's the narrative. Let's say you are a 4-year-old child and Obama's in office. He's extended Title IX to include gender identity. All of a sudden, you have protections about your gender identity that are being affirmed at the executive level, at the federal executive level. Okay, that's really important, right? So during Obama's term, I have some protections. Now, in Obama's second term, you see the number go up to 55, 3 passed, and 52 failed. So we have about 3 during Obama's term. Now, one of the things that happened under Obama, which again, this is really important to think about, is that Obama did not put out, this is probably better, there we go. Obama did not put out the change in Title IX for public commentary. When you make an executive order, it is expected that it's put out for public commentary so that people have an opportunity to respond. And the backlash was that, well, he didn't do it, and he didn't give people an opportunity. So then what you see is when Trump comes into office, there is this animosity and there's this kind of whiplash that happened. So under Trump between 2017 and 2020, and I'm just going to go to that very last year before Trump left office, is you see the number jumped up to 85 bills. Okay, it was 27 when he first came in. But by the time he left office, you will see that about 17, 18, 19, 20 passed total. So we're gone from Obama to 3 and then to Trump at 20. So Biden comes into office. Now, sorry, let me step back for a second. So that kid that I was talking about who's 4 comes in, by the time Trump leaves office, that child is maybe 8. So many of those rights have been taken away because Trump took away gender identity during that time. So here you have rights under Obama, you have protections, and then by the time Trump leaves office, you don't. Okay. So again, I'm just kind of showing you that trajectory. So let's say you're 8 years old by the time Trump leaves office, and all of a sudden your identity becomes part of this, what I call this political ping pong or football game. Biden comes in. Biden attempts to include gender identity, but that actually doesn't pass until he just left office. It doesn't mean there weren't protections in place because of other laws and certain documents that were still being shared widely. But what you see is a huge whiplash from the Republican Party towards Biden. In Biden's first year, you see 153 bills that were put forward, 18 passed and 135 failed. Now look at this number jumped by the time Biden left office. The number goes up to 701 bills that were put forward, 51 passed, and 650 failed. So if you add all these up during Biden's term, 18 plus 26, 87 plus 51, that's a very, very large number, right? Now, again, if you're that child, by the time Biden leaves office, you are about 12 years old. So again, although there were protections in place, many of those protections were still being rolled back. Trump comes into office, and look at this number. This goes to 1,022 in 2025. 126 passed, everybody. 405 failed. Again, we have to look at that. What's more alarming, though, if you look in the column over here, you see that in Biden's last 2 years, we saw that 50 states here. I'm not sure why I have the 17 here. That's a typo on my part. And then in 2025 under Trump, that number was 29 states. And then right now it's 43 states. So you see an increase in the number of states that are putting these forward. And so right now, as I was showing in the other slide, when I did this talk at South by Southwest, that number was 625. And we're at what, 700 and what did I show you? 780? So these numbers are going up all the time. Now, think about this again. That child right now is, what did I say, like 4, 8, 12, 16 years old. And they're still struggling with this. So if you think about suicidal ideation, if you think about other mental health issues, if you think about impact in school environments, our youth are living in these uncertain times where their identities are vulnerable to the shifts and the whims of political government. Okay. How are we doing on time? Should I keep?
Well, we're about halfway through, and we're also want some time for questions and such. So
Okay.
So
Then let me go over one thing, and then we can go ahead and dive into questions if that works.
okay.
Okay. So one of the things I'm advocating for is the pedagogy of refusal. You should be able to see this screen okay. And a pedagogy of refusal is an active refusal that a teacher, an educator initiates during a classroom setting. And it's spread across math, English, social studies, science, physical education, health ed, and theater and visual arts.
Can you make the screen a little bit smaller because the refusal is cut off? We can't see it.
Or what about
There you
that?
go. Thank you.
Okay, there you go. Okay. So this is not about saying no. It's about ways in which the teacher interrupts an anti-trans policy in the moment. And so what I do in the book is I actually script out the policy for whoever's reading the text, whether it's a teacher, an administrator, a parent. So you actually physically have the text, because it's important to be able to look at the law and then think about what's in law, the de jure, and then the de facto, meaning what the teacher actually does in practice. So it's how the teacher in the classroom circumvents and figures out a way, strategizes a way to interrupt that moment of an anti-trans policy impacting that school. So what I talk about, it's something that is broken down in these 7 different layers. So it's a way that a teacher challenges the way they teach. So it's pedagogical, it's linguistic, it's what the teacher actually says, and this is all based on how they've understood the law. It's institutional, so it's looking at the ways that teachers are having conversations at the school level. It's affective, it's the ways in which they are responding emotionally to students. It's the curriculum, so it's knowing what's in the standards, and it's knowing how to shift the curriculum so that trans students are affirmed. It's spatial, it's the ways in which the teacher uses the room, whether they're posters, they're symbols, there are other items or artifacts that are in there. And then it's communal. It's the ways in which those schools are connecting to the larger community, whether it's schools in the district, it's across the state, and so forth. Okay, so these are acts of refusal. So these are deliberate and ethical responses to systemic harm that resist policy, mandates, or cultural forces that compromise dignity, safety, and truth. Okay, so there are 3 types of refusals, and then we can stop here. There's what I call the micro, the meso, and the macro. And the micro is what's happening right there in the classroom. It's what the teacher's doing immediately. Then there's the meso, which is how that's impacting or connecting to the school. And then there is the macro, which is the community-wide types of refusals that are restructuring perhaps that district based on how teachers are connecting with other schools. So what I'll do is I'll stop there, and essentially I kind of gave you an overview of like what the book does. There are vignettes within each chapter. So there is an elementary, a middle school, a high school, and a post-secondary, 4 different vignettes that show you the teachers actually making these different types of refusals. And then there is a section there's a massive set of resources for anybody to use, whether they're for those acts of refusal or to educate yourselves around policy, documentaries, films, policy trackers, advocacy groups. There's about 1,000 resources. It's massive. I have some in the book, and I'm building out a website that I'll show you before we get off for anybody to go on to in any of these different subject areas.
Thank you, SJ. We're going to open it up to questions. I'm going to lead with a few before we open it up to the larger group. The idea of refusal is a very big part of your book, and one of the things I noticed is that you talk about refusal as not just being about resistance, but that it's also a construction. Can you talk about what educators are building when they engage in refusal?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Let's see, let me think about one. In Florida, under HB 1557, that is where there's a Parental Rights and Education Act. And this is a story that came from my research. There was a 3rd and 8th grade classroom, and there were 2 siblings, and the siblings were both non-binary, and there were a lot of undocumented families in this area, and the mother came to pick the 2 kids up from school, and was taken by ICE right in front of everybody. The kids were screaming. It was a horrible scene. And the teachers immediately reached out to the aunt and uncle who the kids were also living with. And they figured out a way that, to keep the kids going in school while they were dealing with this. And so what the teachers did is in that school, or in that area, it restricted classroom conversations on gender and gender identity, and people you can't talk about it, and you cannot call a child by their or a student by their chosen name. So what the teachers decided to do was to collaborate and create a unit in each of their classrooms around, um, how what the kids must be going through right now with at home. And they very cleverly created a unit in one class. They did a science unit on, water density, and in the other classroom, the 8th grade classroom, they did it on deforestation with trees. And without going into a lot of detail in this, each of the classrooms then had the same units going on so that the siblings would have something to talk about. So in one classroom, it was about working with water flow, and an example was that when water flows and then you put like a rock in the way, the water has to go around it. And in the 8th grade classroom, they talked about, well, in when you have a forest and trees are cut down, what happens to those trees? Where do they go? Essentially, what they were doing was allowing a space for those students to talk about their experiences through those different items, through those different experiences. And then by so doing, the teachers would get together and have conversations with each other and say, "What are you seeing?" The other teacher would say, "What are you seeing?" And then bringing the siblings back together and having a conversation. That's what I mean about a micro unit, basically, a micro incident. Um, and then at the meso level, if you think about it, the teachers are already connecting with each other. There was an unfortunate outcome of that because one of the youth, Drea, was misgendered, in the classroom, but the teacher corrected the situation. The teacher wasn't supposed to correct the situation. The teacher was actually put on leave. So, these stories aren't necessarily victorious, but the point is that the 2 siblings at least were able to connect around this, in ways that they couldn't at school because they could at home. So that's an example, if that's, I think, what you're leaning towards. So they
Yeah.
are working towards, like, how do I still affirm my students even in a space that doesn't affirm them? And it's that kinda coded way of navigating through curriculum that is parallel to what's going on for them at home.
Yeah, that does answer it. Thank you. One more question from me. Your book really frames public education as one of the central battlegrounds for democracy itself. What do you think schools have? Why do you think schools have become such a focal point in these political conflicts?
That's a great question. I think part of it has to do with hatred and not understanding, um, the beauty of humanity and people who are different, and so, it's like a return to, complete religious ideology and Eurocentrism, right, and patriarchy, and it's fear of the unknown. It's not being able to understand difference and people's discomfort with that. And so, we have to think about the attacks on trans communities as part of a larger civil rights issue, right? None of these things happen in intersections. I mean, all these things happen in intersections, not in silos. And in fact, if you were to take a map of the attacks on critical race theory and put it right on top of where those trans bans are, it's identical. So we are looking at, the assault on people of color, right, and undocumented people, and where SNAP benefits are being taken away from, and Medicare and Medicaid. All of this is to get rid of what they would call the bottom feeders, right, the people that don't matter, that are not deemed worthy of certain people's perspectives.
At this point, I want to open the floor to our participants. If you would like to ask SJ a question, you can unmute yourself or you can type in the chat. I'll give all of you a chance to do so. While we wait for other people to ask questions, I also have another one for you. So our participants haven't had a chance to read your book yet, but I did take a look. And one of the things I noticed about it was that it was unusual for an academic book. It's very lyrical. It has a poetic register, more than a traditional academic one. Why was poetry the right way to begin this project for you?
I think that's how I process information. I think in I'm very, very linear, but then my poetry, I think helps me process information a little bit better. Um, and I wanted to write it and I wanted to get people interested in it in different ways, and I thought poetry would be an interesting way to do it. Um, and then towards the end of the book, I come back and do recitation. But I I don't know. I just think that was a way for me to get into it, to be honest with you.
We have a question. She asked, what do you think is the best way for people outside the school system to fight anti-trans bills and policies? People who aren't teachers or parents or students.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm gonna go to one of my slides on that. So if we're talking about perhaps maybe friends, allies, and other practitioners in your communities, faith and spiritual leaders, lots of different ways to get involved. So, for instance, people can get involved with obviously different protest groups. They can work with local rape crisis centers. They can visit and pull this up. I think it'll be easier to show you. Here we go. They can reach out to like the Trevor Project. They can reach out to local LGBTQIA centers. They can find ways that they can get involved. I also think that people can look up who their Congress people are related to anti-trans legislation and reach out to them. There's a great website that you can do that on that tracks all different policy domains. It's called Legislation Tracker, and you can just go in there and type in whatever policy term that comes to mind for you, and it'll pop everything up in your state. So that's another way. For instance, like with librarians and museums and so forth, people can resist and reach out to the American Library Association. You can join things like the Unite Against Book Bans campaigns. There are lots and lots of different archives out there, and just emailing the people there and having conversations with there and seeing what's in those archives is another way. Also organizing exhibits, public displays, leading speaker series or banned book events, getting involved with, different the speaker series is a great one. Also with faith and spiritual leaders coming together and having conversations with each other around these topics and having, what we might call, focus groups, right? Or book groups, book talks around these, having guest speakers come in. Those are some of the suggestions I can offer.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? One question I have is, you had talked earlier, you gave that one really good example about what a couple teachers were doing to try to support their students. And then you sort of added toward the end that one of those teachers was put on leave. And when one of the questions I have is like, how do educators navigate that tension between trying to survive within an institution that's hostile to our community while navigating that moral responsibility when the laws are, conflicting with affirming students?
Yeah, that's what the whole book is trying to figure out. It's not easy, and I think that the teachers who are truly courageous are the ones that stay in the system because they know that those kids need them more than anybody. Um, I think there were 2 that were fired that I talk about in the book, and then there were 3 that were put on leave. And so those teachers refused to leave, which, it was really important for them to be there for their students. So again, like knowing what the law is, studying the law, figuring out ways to teach in coded ways. But at the same time, here's the real issue, everybody. It's it's not that teachers can't do this work, it's that they have to put it out in such a way that it's neutral. They're not students aren't they have to do it in a way that students can't analyze it and interpret it. That's really the problem. So, teachers have to put it out in such a way that the questions that they ask do not allow for interpretation. It's gotta be fact-based, kind of like, probably many of us who were went to high school back in the, 50s, 60s, 70s, it was like the answer is in the book. There is no place for interpretation, and that's where the system is trying to revert to again. So a teacher might say something like, "What" there was a teacher who taught she was a taught a junior class in world politics, and many of the students were international students, and she was able to say, "What does democracy look like in your country?" Right? So just as general of a question as that, but then students were talking about democracy. So the analysis wasn't in her question, right? It allowed for the students to actually have conversation about what democracy looked like. So it's gotta be that general. But if you think about it, LGBTQIA topics are gonna come up from within the students, and the teacher just flows with it pretty much. Um,
I would
that
actually like to get a little bit more. You talk about that being neutral, and you know, among us, we're all supportive of the LGBTQ community. But for the soundbite, could you sort of tell us? Some critics think that we shouldn't be talking about gender identity because we need to be neutral. What is your response to that framing and what neutral means?
what do I think neutral means?
What, because people are the argument that the critics are saying is we should be neutral, but obviously among us, that's not really neutral, right? But I kind of want to get a little favor from you, your position on like why these people are saying, oh, we should not talk about gender identity because we want to be neutral. What's your response to that?
Well, I think that goes back to what I was saying a little bit earlier that, I mean, first of all, education is not neutral. There's no neutrality. However you teach is a political statement. So if I put students in a circle, I am demonstrating that, I want people to have conversation. I want people to dialogue. Versus if I have students in rows, I'm sending a very clear message about the type of teaching that I do, right? So, um, Howard Zinn says you can't be neutral on a moving train. Like there's just no neutrality in education. I think neutrality is incredibly dangerous because when you're neutral, you're complicit, right? To not rise up and not do something and push back in the system. Obviously, on the left, I don't see that neutrality um, at all. I mean, with any of the conversations that I've had, in the right, I see an enforcement of neutrality, and teachers having to figure out ways to go around the standards again through being creative in their lesson plans. And I think that no matter what, even if you continue to layer more anti-trans laws in those states and censor teachers, teachers are so smart and savvy, they're gonna continue to figure out ways to get around those restrictions.
Yeah, and I would just add, there's a lot of in political theory discussion about framing and what get in the context of this, the framing would be what gets to be count as neutral, right? And what is considered politicized versus what is considered neutral, right? Um, so, does anyone have any other questions? If not, I have one more, and this is one to sort of close in on. Um, Looking at hope, right now things are dark. We're facing an administration that is very anti-trans. but your book is really invested in joy, creativity, and possibility. Where are you currently finding hope, and where are you seeing hope for the future?
I'm in conversations like these, honestly, connecting, seeing people who care and who become, who are advocates in any ways that they can be. Um, I just came from a vigil on Sunday around Juniper Blessing's murder. I'm sure everybody's heard of the murder. She's from here. She's from Santa Fe. And I also teach at the University of Washington, and it's ironic that I teach there and she's from here. Um, and I saw how many people came out to the gathering, and people who may not even know a trans person, and a community coming together, in song and sadness, but at the same time, like finding solidarity in each other. And I think that's a really powerful way of healing, is to find ways to be in community, because that's where I think we can find strength, right, and be rejuvenated.
I 100% agree. Anyone else want to chime in as we come to the end here? Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you especially for S.J. Miller for presenting with us and telling us about your book. Well, thank you so much, S.J. It was really, really helpful information. If you would like, just for Faye, for example, we'll have this published online, and we'll have a follow-up email. And thank you all. Thank you all so much for spending some time with us.